Bravely Default 2. It's the second game in the Bravely Default series. Well, it's actually the third because obviously you had Bravely Default and then that had a direct sequel called Bravely Second, End Layer. So this is the third game that's not necessarily related to any of the other games. Bravely Default 2. It's a little confusing. So, Bravely Default 2 is a JRPG for the Nintendo Switch, and it is from the minds that not only brought you Bravely Default and Bravely Second End Layer, but also Octopath Traveler, which was also on the Nintendo Switch. So you know, hopefully, that it's going to be providing you that sweet, delicious JRPG action that everyone yearns and craves for. Well, no. But we'll get onto that later. In the continent of Excellent exists 4 magical crystals of earth, wind, water and fire. And every single one of them has gone wrong. And naturally you need to go on a grand quest to unwrong them by restoring the crystals. So far, so classic JRPG experience. You'll amass a party of characters to go and explore and take the world down one line dance at a time. That's what we call combat, because everyone stands in a line and hopefully save the day with, well, little else going wrong.
Game's up, Grandad. Put the sword down or the kid gets it.
Probably. During these hoedowns, you can use the Brave and Default system, allowing you to expend or stock up on future turns for a big burst of damage, or to go on the defensive and prepare for the perfect time to strike. But simply attacking your opponents with normal attacks is boring. Surely there are a wild plethora of skills that you can use. In order to do that though, you need to get a job. Next customer, please. Goodness, I'm funny. No. In Bravely Default 2, it uses the job system that you may have found in the previous games, meaning as you are going on your grand adventure, you'll be collecting asterisks, plot MacGuffins, which ultimately unlock new classes and abilities for your party to eventually use. And this is where a lot of the appeal for this game comes from. As you unlock more and more jobs, you'll start dressing your characters up, and as you unlock more of their skills and abilities, the code begins to unfold in front of you as you begin wondering how you can come up with something devilishly powerful by combining the passives, abilities and strengths of the various jobs. It may not be too unreasonable to take a moment in your busy schedule to just quietly train everyone in being an archer, because there's that one anti-counter skill that just seems too good to be true, even for your mages. By combining your main job's strengths and specialties with the skills of a sub-job, you can begin creating whatever party you want. Do you want a hard-hitting attacker who also heals and is speedy? Sure, you can probably work that out somewhere. Not to mention that you'll be trying to make sure you cover a wide variety of the different weapons and elements at your disposal to take advantage of the various weaknesses that your enemies may have. There is a lot going on in the combat, and it is a genuine delight to deep dive into. Every time you unlock a brand new job, your eyes have these moments of reopening because you've suddenly gotten a whole load of new skills and abilities to use and use alongside all the other bits and pieces that you've had. So you have to think it once again and have an entirely new look on all of your skills and how they can all work together. As well as trying to balance all your different types of equipment and exploring and everything. There are times when you can genuinely begin to feel quite powerful. Not to mention, you've got the abilities of making your party feel brave with preemptive attacks where you can swing your sword on the map and hit monsters. But also you can use that for finding items by cutting grass. Cutting grass.
over.
Okay, let's take a moment to talk about a major issue with Bravely Default 2, and that's its wild slip and slide difficulty curve. Good gracious, can you go into a fight and before you even had a turn, your entire party and everyone you know and love has died and you're slapped with the big old game over screen. Running through some of the dungeons, especially the earlier ones, can feel like an absolute slog as they provide you with one save point and one save point only, being at the very end of the dungeon itself. Fighting through these dungeons slowly eats up your resources, being health or mana, until you're possibly near the end, struggling to get by from battle to battle. But turning around and leaving means you get to do the whole experience all over again. And that's not even taking into account certain areas where everything is weak to an element you've never met before and resistant to pretty much everything else, turning even the most carefully planned fights into a nightmare.
Is this really it?
What this does is make the game a bit of a grind at times. Sure, you don't have to fight every single monster in the dungeon, you can just run past them. But there is going to be a boss at the end, and it will kill you.
I shall prevail!
It's curtains for you.
Fine, you think. I'm at a point where I'm so powerful that the monsters literally run away from me. Surely now the boss will crumble at my feet. No. Now, I'm not complaining about the game being, well, a little bit challenging. You know, I don't want the game to be easy, and I'm not necessarily complaining about the game being a little bit hard and having to think about what I'm doing in a fight. No. But what is routinely annoying in every boss fight is, well, like, in theory, the combat of Bravely Default follows like a simple rhythm and pattern, right? In that you'd be defaulting and saving up your BP in your turns so that you can do a number of, like, you could do a really big turn all at once doing a lot of damage. At the same time, your enemy will also have the ability to brave and default. So once the boss or whatever has defaulted a lot and they store up a lot of BP, you're like, okay, cool, they're about to do a big move. I'm gonna default now to reduce the amount of damage taking. And it's that sort of back and forth of well-timed strikes that's kind of meant to probably be the entire, like, how the combat's meant to play out. That's what the system is, so that's what it's gonna be, right? However, it isn't though. What a lot of the bosses are in this game are cheap difficulty. Because you see, around about the midpoint of the game, if not slightly earlier, every single boss basically counters almost every single move you do, making, well, your goes seem pointless and self-defeating. Like, oh, you're gonna default to store up some BP so you can do a bigger attack later? Oh, that's cool, but the boss is gonna counter by giving themselves a buff to make themselves stronger. Well, that's fine, you're gonna do an attack? Ugh, the boss counters anyway with a big, strong attack. Do some magic? The boss counters by gaining some BP. Oh, what if you heal? The boss counters that. What if you buff yourself? The boss counters that. Everything you do just basically gives the boss another go, and it's so tedious. The fights end up becoming so drawn out because for every single action you do, you have to spend another billion actions making up for the fact that you've just basically damaged yourself, and you never end up feeling like you're actually winning anymore, and instead you're just the entire time on the back foot, dying over and over and over again, and it sucks. And goodness, do they all have a moment in them when the boss kicks it into maximum overdrive. The number of boss fights where you'll get halfway through with a reasonable balance of damage and healing, and then suddenly the boss lets loose 20 attacks, one after another, somehow at an endless supply of moves, and your party has died and you have to start over again. Bravely Default 2 also enacts one of the cardinal sins for games, in that a number of the bosses heal. A couple of bosses, I found myself in a perfect stalemate with the boss, healing more or less as quickly as I could damage it. The only way the fight would come to an end would be the heat death of the universe itself. Or the boss running out of mana, which isn't really something you should be seeing in your boss fights. There's just so many times where you'll die in a boss fight, and instead of thinking, oh, you got me, I pushed my luck, I accidentally misplayed that. That doesn't happen. Instead, you're routinely sat there, sitting in a puddle of your own rage. And do you know what the worst part is? The bosses are probably the most interesting part in the game. Well, no, the mechanics in combat and those sort of systems, they're the actual best part. They're the most interesting part of the game. But what I mean is in terms of story, oh, it's so boring. It's boring. I am bored through this game. But at least the bosses, the enemies you encounter, their bits of story, they tend to at least be interesting. They tend to have flavor and they tend to be at least cool, maybe. The story is, once again, saving the 4 magic crystals, being the heroes of light, yada yada yada, save the day, fight a big evil monster of darkness or something. That's it. That's the game. You're presented with 4 characters, all who have the exact same face, and one of them is Scottish for some reason.
All the more reason to suspect him, says I. There's no smoke without fire.
And they're all boring and their stories are boring. Sure, one of them is meant to be an Avatar character. Cool. But turns out they're all Avatar characters because who these people are doesn't matter at all. Other than that they all become warriors of light, because of course they do.
If you seek the sweet release of death instead, you need only wait for it to wrap its arms around you.
I genuinely didn't expect them to call my bluff like that. The game plays out in chapters with a new town for each chapter and a new magical crystal. The problem is that these are all self-contained. The only thread that takes you through the game is that we're saving the crystals. You finish your adventure in a town and then there's just this vague murmuring that the town conveniently next in the chain may have your next crystal. Who cares? That said though, the stories within the chapters are actually quite interesting, and the characters that may or may not be the villains are interesting and unique, and look cool. When a wall of gormless nobodies, which include the player characters, are talking about something at one another...
Is something the matter?
No, it's nothing.
They're sort of all blown out of the water when an actual character with design and personality walks onto the screen and hits you with some genuinely wonderful voice acting.
Fool. Try to sell me your pathetic worldview, would you? You forget that I do not buy, I take.
Oh yeah, I bet he's evil and important. There it is, evil laugh, definitely evil. It is quite funny though, as whenever you enter a new area, you're met with a horde of unblinking, gormless figures who all look the exact same because they're NPCs, and trying to work out who's going to be the plot relevant ones, who's going to play a big important role, and who will invariably be a boss fight, is as simple as just looking left to right and scanning the room for someone dressed to the nines. That's the one. kill him. These chapter stories are actually some of the time quite interesting because they deal with interesting concepts, like a leader's lust for power to, ultimately do things that are wrong, but purely for the means of helping his people, or a couple of parents trying to process the grief of their dead child, or like one which is kind of dealing with the idea of religious pressures and groupthink and how that wildly rapidly gets out of hand and people start doing things they don't agree with due to societal pressures. And all of those stories would play out more or less the exact same without the main party. It's all done by the other characters around you, and your party doesn't have any impact other than, they're the swords to beat someone to death with. And that's kind of it. Like, honestly, I can't tell you anything about these main characters, the main party, other than that two of them are slightly less annoying than the other two. There are also a number of side quests you can do that are as simple as kill enemy at location, or walk across town and talk to an NPC and then walk back. Easy enough to ignore. However, some of the side quests include the only bits where your main characters actually exist as a character. Some idea of a backstory actually being brought about. The reason why these two are travelling together may be important to the plot or something. Nah, it just comes up in a side quest about shoes. Why even are you here? Is it for a reason that is 100% vital to the entire plot?
The truth is, I didn't much enjoy looking for Edna all by myself. She'd left the village without telling anyone where she was going, without leaving any clues.
Probably best to never mention it at all until the very end, or in a number of side quest cutscenes.
Wow.
So much of Bravely Default 2 is just boring and uninteresting. It is quite literally the painting by numbers for a JRPG adventure. 4 magical crystals, heroes of light, some shadowy dark creature who, doesn't really ever turn up but until the very end, and you've got to defeat them with the power of magic and friendship or something. I don't know or care. And all your characters are just faceless outfits and jobs. They don't have any character. That's it. The worst part is the previous games still had these sort of semi-tropes of magical crystals and big bad evil shadowy monsters, etc. But they were interesting at least. Bravely Default had you playing the game's story over and over and over again in this weird meta-narrative, different dimension system that, sure, was controversial at the time because it was a bit padding, but at the same time it was memorable and unique and entirely based around this divide between two religions. Bravely Second, Endlair, had a story that transcended through time and had you jumping backwards and forwards in time to ultimately break through the boss and the story and everything, and every character had a character. They felt like they belonged or had some reason to be on this journey. They had their own desires and their own flaws and their actual impacts on the story and unique points of view in each scenario. Bravely Default 2 doesn't have that. It doesn't really have anything. Instead, Bravely Default 2 manages to perfectly sum itself up itself. Towards the end of the game, sort of vaguely, one of the big bads is monologuing at you about the reason they're doing all their things. It's kind of boring. It's really boring. And one of the faceless members of your party pipes up and says, "I'm tired of hearing the same old stories." And that's Bravely Default 2 in a nutshell. It is the well-trod ground of every JRPG over and over and over again. It is sometimes interesting little stories wrapped in a grander adventure that is just 35 years too late. Hello, it's me, your favourite boss character, Jan Smithson, and that was a review of Bravely Default 2. It's a game, it's sort of boring, but it's a game. Games, however, exist, and if you wanted more videos about games, oh well, firstly, why don't you let me know about what you thought about Bravely Default 2, because me, Gunsmithson, is interested in such a thing. I don't know. Otherwise, you can check out some of the other videos on this channel. One about, otherwise, you can check out some of the other videos on this channel, such as this one, which is about quick saves in video games. That could be interesting. Or this one down here, which is possibly about a board game, which is like a video game, but bored about the board game Skulk Hollow. Why don't you try that out as well? Otherwise, you can click on my face, Gunsmithson, to subscribe to the channel, the Gunsmithson Show channel. It's not what it's called. Thank you and goodbye.